Question number 12, Julie Ann Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Associate Minister of Health. Will he recommend his government change the law so that New Zealanders with terminal illness using medical cannabis aren't at risk of being raided and prosecuted by the police?
The Honourable Peter Dunne.
Mr. Speaker, patients using approved cannabis-based products such as Sativex and other approved non-pharmaceutical grade cannabis products are not at risk. For those choosing to use raw cannabis or unapproved cannabis-based products, I have received a number of assurances from the Commissioner of Police that small-scale use by the terminally ill is not a priority, and that approach is consistent with the emphasis on compassion set out in the Government's 2015 National Drug Policy. I have considered the Compassionate Access Scheme implemented in New South Wales. However, following very frank discussions with the Australian delegation at last month's United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs meeting about the workability of such a scheme, I have concluded that New Zealand's more pragmatic approach, based around the pillars of compassion, proportion and innovation that underpin the National Drug Policy, is the more appropriate course to follow.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
So rather than changing the law to reflect that fact that we think that it's acceptable for sick people to use cannabis to alleviate their suffering, is he suggesting that people should continue to break the law, hoping that the police won't pursue them?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Peter Dunne.
I make 2 points in response. Firstly, there is a huge distinction to be drawn between raw cannabis and cannabis-based medicinal products. The Government has no interest in making any legal change, nor does any other party in Parliament, as far as I'm aware, to the status of the raw cannabis plant. With regard to cannabis-based medicines, the best advice I would give any patient who feels they might benefit from such a medicine is to talk to their general practitioner and their specialist about accessing the pathway that is in place. They can view that at the Ministry of Health website. It's a very simple pathway to follow, and if it's determined that that's the best treatment available to them, then it can be made available to them. For people who choose to go outside that system, then they do run the risks, particularly if they are using the raw product. But as I said earlier, I've been assured by the police that they will adopt a compassionate approach.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
Without a clear legal framework or a register for patients, how will the police be able to judge who is a legitimate medical user and who will they be compassionate with?
The Honourable Peter Dunne.
The member raises a good point, and was one that I pursued with the Australians when I discussed the matter with them. And the absence of a register is actually no salvation in this regard, because they find exactly the same problem with the register in New South Wales as to determining who is a legitimate name to be included upon it. And bear in mind, in the New South Wales case, you can include up to 3 other people as supporters. But they've also found a number of people who are suppliers, when confronted by the police about being suppliers, say, oh, they only supply to patients with terminal illnesses. So the whole thing has become essentially unworkable. I think the pragmatic approach that we have here, provided it's exercised with compassion, is the far more prudent course to follow.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question, Julie Ann Genter.
Well, without a law change, how can he ensure that terminally and chronically ill patients in New Zealand that they won't find themselves in court for using cannabis to alleviate their suffering?
Mr. Speaker,
the Honourable Peter Dunne.
I didn't hear the first part of the member's question, but I think what she was seeking was some clarification as to how we can protect people from the potential risk. And I come back to what I said in response to the earlier supplementary. The very best step that anyone who feels that they would benefit from a cannabis-based medical product can take is to talk to their general practitioner about accessing the pathway set out so clearly in the Ministry of Health website. People who resort to just growing a bit in the backyard or talking to a mate and getting some from them do run some risks. If they have genuine health issues, my absolutely strong advice is to talk to your general practitioner about accessing the pathway that's currently available.
And that concludes questions for oral answer. I have received a letter from Carmel Sepuloni seeking to debate under Standing Order 389.